Good day everyone, I'm Darlene and you're watching Balitang Makabayan. Today, we dive into one of the most pressing and controversial issues facing our nation, the ongoing maritime dispute in the West Philippine Sea. The West Philippine Sea, part of the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, remains a major source of tension with China. In 2016, an international tribunal ruled that China's nine-dashed line has no legal basis under UNCLOS. Despite this, China continues to assert control through military presence and artificial island construction. Today, we shift the lens to China's perspective, its official claims, government records, and historical justifications. To begin our analysis of the primary sources, here is May who will walk us through the first three key documents released by the Chinese government.
China's official response come in the form of the position paper issued on December 7, 2014. In it, Beijing rejected the arbitration process altogether. The Chinese government maintains that the dispute is not about maritime entitlements alone, but about territorial sovereignty and maritime delimitation. A central pillar of China's claims lies on its historical narrative. According to Beijing, its presence in the region goes back centuries. China argues that it has long exercised sovereignty over the islands and the waters of the South China Sea, referred to in Chinese document as the Non-Sha Islands. But beyond history and law, China also accuses the Philippines of breaking a diplomatic promise, one made through ASEAN. In 2002, China and ASEAN member states, including the Philippines, signed the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. This agreement encourages all parties to resolve maritime disputes through peaceful negotiation and mutual consent.
For the fourth primary source, in a 2022 speech, Chinese President Xi Jinping emphasized that protecting the seas is part of China's national development. He made it clear that maritime claims are deeply tied to China's pride, economic growth, and national security. This statement gives us insight into why China is so firm in its claims. For our last primary source, in 2023, China released updated maps showing the controversial nine-dash line. These maps were distributed through schools, media, and government websites aiming to normalize their version of history and territory.
Good day everyone, this is JJ Shane Alonzo and you are watching Balita Makabayan. Today, we focus on the rising tensions in the West Philippine Sea. China continues to assert sweeping claims backed by its controversial nine-dash line, extending deep into the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. Beijing defends these claims as historical rights, but critics, including a 2022 U.S. State Department report, argue they lack legal basis under international law, specifically UNCLOS. China maintains a firm stance on the West Philippine Sea, especially following the 2013-2016 arbitration initiated by the Philippines. Rejecting multilateral legal proceedings, Beijing continues to push for bilateral negotiations instead.
The South China Sea is a key hotspot for future geopolitical conflict due to its strategic and economic importance. Over $5 trillion in trade passes through it annually, and it holds significant oil and natural gas reserves. Kaplan highlights that the tensions are fueled not only by resource competition but also by historical disputes. Figure 7.1, the Philippines Evolving West Philippine Sea Strategy, Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis by Raj and Kumar. He discusses the Philippines' more assertive response to Chinese actions in the West Philippine Sea. Key legislative steps like the Philippine Maritime Zones Act and Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act strengthen its maritime boundaries under UNCLOS. Figure 8.1, China's claims to historic rights in the South China Sea by Gerasi, year 2022. Gerasi, year 2022 explains that China bases its claim in the South China Sea on historic rights, arguing long-standing usage and control grant
its special legal status under international law beyond UNCLOS rules.
Good day, Makabayans. I am Jerlyn P. Escalante, and this is a special report on the ongoing tensions in the South China Sea. Today, we take a closer look at the contrasting narratives between China's claims and the international community's legal standards, revealing deep biases, limitations, and contradictions. Primary sources shows that China presents a nationalistic and one-sided view, heavily relying on historical rights and bilateral negotiations. It frames its actions as purely defensive, while actively dismissing any competing claims from other nations. Meanwhile, secondary sources challenge this position. Analysts highlight the lack of legal clarity in the nine-dashed line and criticize China's selective application of international law.
Good day, everyone. I'm Anton Abelia, reporting on the Chinese government's perspective and claims over the South China Sea. I will be discussing the biases of both primary and secondary sources regarding this topic. Starting with the primary source, Chinese government statements tend to represent a self-justifying narrative portraying China as the rightful historical sovereign and the Philippines as the aggressor. There is no room for counterclaims or alternative interpretations. Next is the secondary sources. Many analyses begin with UNCLOS-centric frameworks, potentially underestimating the cultural or historical dimensions of China's claims. This may dismiss the symbolic or strategic weight of historical rights in China's political thought.
Good day. I am Francisca Jail Kubkuban from Balitang Makabayan, reporting on the Chinese government's perspective and claims over the South China Sea. I will be discussing the limitations of both primary and secondary sources when analyzing the China's position on this territorial dispute. Starting with primary sources, such as official Chinese government's documents or statements, a major limitation is the lack of transparency. These documents often make historical claims about the South China Sea, but rarely include supporting evidence, clear methodology, or access to original source materials. This makes it difficult for international researchers or legal experts to verify the legitimacy of these claims or engage in meaningful scrutiny. On the other hand, secondary sources such as scholarly articles and analyses written by foreign experts face their own limitations. One major challenge is language and access barriers. Many foreign researchers don't have access to internal Chinese language documents and must rely on translated official statements. This can lead to a loss of context, subtle meanings, or key cultural references, which limits the depth and accuracy of their interpretations. Again, this is Francisca Jail Kubkuban, reporting from Balitang Makabayan.
Good day, Makabayan! I'm AJ Canli Castañar Zazarte from Balitang Makabayan, reporting on this Chinese government's perspective and claims over the South China Sea. I'll be discussing the contradictions of both primary and secondary sources when analyzing China's position on this territorial dispute. The primary source we presented are from the Chinese government's official documents, historical maps, and speeches. This reflects China's own view of its legal and historical claim. But we need to remember that legality does not equal behavior. This means that even though an international ruling, like the 2016 arbitral ruling, may be clear under the law, it doesn't necessarily affect how states behave in practice. In this case, Beijing disregards the ruling and sticks to its own narrative. Meanwhile, our secondary sources are from reports, analysis, and perspectives from journalists and scholars. They have their own limitations. They often neglect of regional perspectives. This means their view focuses predominantly on the dispute between China and the Philippines, ignoring the roles of ASEAN members, local fisherfolk, and even nearby states with overlapping disputes. So when we view the conflict through a narrow, two-sided framework, we miss the bigger picture. We miss the perspectives of stakeholders who are directly affected by these disputes and who have their own roles to play in future negotiations and peace building.
Hi, I'm Queenie Baha, and today I'll talk about the contribution of various sources to our understanding of the West Philippine Sea dispute. So these sources help us see how China justifies its claims. mainly through historical narratives, legal arguments, and strategic interests. Official documents and speeches highlight China's sovereignty and the controversial Nine-Dash Line, while also rejecting international rulings like the 2016 arbitration. China's state-published maps and media are also powerful tools. They shape public opinion and reinforce their claims. On the other hand, secondary sources reveal how these claims often contradict international law, and they also shed light on the political, economic, and military motivations behind China's action. Altogether, these sources give us a clearer and deeper view of the complex issues and tensions behind the ongoing West Philippine Sea dispute.
And that wraps up our report on the West Philippine Sea dispute, where law, history, and power continue to collide. As tensions persist, one thing remains clear: the search for truth and peace in these contested waters is far from over. Once again, I'm Darlene, and you're watching Balitang Makabayan.